At dawn in Lorraine, an American gun crew waited inside a machine the Army had almost refused to send to war. No roof, 25 millimeters of armor at its thickest point. A hull so thin that officers said a heavy machine gun could tear through it if the angle was right. And somewhere in the fog ahead of them, German Panthers were coming. The Panther was built like a problem with no polite answer. 44 tons of sloped armor, a long 75 millimeter gun. Optics good enough to kill at distances where most crews were still trying to identify the shape in the haze. Against that, the American crew had a vehicle called the M18 Hellcat, 17.5 tons, open turret, a 76 millimeter gun that could be deadly from the side, dangerous from the rear, and deeply unreliable against a Panther's strongest front plate. On paper, this was not a fair fight. On paper, it was almost irresponsible. Then the first Panther came through the fog. The Hellcat fired. The Panther stopped. A second later, flame punched out of the German tank and lit the whole road orange. Before the return fire could find them, the Hellcat was already moving. Not backing away. Not waiting to trade shots. Moving, because the Hellcat had been built around a sentence that sounded insane until men started living because of it. Its armor was not steel. Its armor was time. That was the argument Lieutenant General Andrew Bruce had been making since before most of the Army believed him. Not louder guns. Not heavier plates. Not another slow armored box trying to meet German tanks head-on. Bruce wanted a vehicle that could arrive before disaster, hardened into a breakthrough. Fire before the enemy understood where the shot came from, and leave before the enemy could answer. Every other tank designer in that room was counting inches of armor. Bruce was counting seconds, and in 1942, seconds were the one thing the American Army did not have. The early tank destroyers were humiliating machines. Some were little more than anti-tank guns bolted onto trucks. Others were half-tracks with weapons large enough to anger a German tank, but not enough protection to survive the argument. The concept sounded elegant in doctrine. Keep fast anti-tank units behind the line. When German armor punches through, rush them to the rupture. Stop the tanks before the breakthrough spreads. But the first versions of that idea were too slow, too exposed, or too undergunned. North Africa proved it brutally. At Kasserine Pass, American anti-tank doctrine met German armor in real war conditions, and the paper logic tore apart. Vehicles were overrun. Guns arrived late. Crews found themselves looking at armor they could not stop from angles they could not survive. The Army's natural answer was simple: more armor. That answer made sense. It was sober, professional, and wrong for the problem Bruce was trying to solve. Because a tank destroyer was not supposed to sit in the line and absorb punishment. It was supposed to be the fire brigade. And a fire brigade that arrives after the house is ash is not a fire brigade. It is an accounting department. Bruce looked at the numbers and saw the failure hiding in plain sight. The M10 Wolverine, America's main tank destroyer, could do roughly 30 miles per hour on road. A Panther could do about 28 under good conditions. That meant the American reserve vehicle was barely faster than the thing it was supposed to intercept. 2 miles per hour. That was not tactical mobility. That was hope with tracks. Bruce asked for 50 miles per hour in a tracked fighting vehicle, with a gun powerful enough to kill German armor, with a crew of 5. The reaction was predictable. Officers laughed because they were not fools. They knew what tanks weighed. They knew what steel cost in speed. They knew a Sherman carried far more armor and still moved like a heavy farm machine compared with what Bruce was asking for. A combat vehicle doing 50 miles per hour sounded like a fantasy, unless you were willing to commit the design sin that made the whole thing possible. Strip the armor down until it almost stopped being armor at all. Keep only enough protection for fragments, small arms from poor angles, and battlefield debris. Take every pound that would have become thickness and turn it into motion. That was the trade. Not a mistake. A philosophy. The contract went to Buick in Flint, Michigan. That part of the story still feels strange. A company known for sedans, civilian engines, polished dashboards, and American comfort was asked to build the fastest tracked fighting vehicle of the Second World War. But Buick understood something the armored establishment did not. Speed is not a personality trait. It is engineering, engine power, weight, suspension, transmission. Give the same 400 horsepower right radial engine a body half the weight of a Sherman, and the world changes. The Sherman weighed more than 30 tons. The Hellcat came in around 17 and a half. That difference was not a detail. It was the weapon. Buick's engineers used torsion bar suspension, giving the vehicle a smoother ride at high speed than standard American tank suspension could provide. They worked with automatic transmission principles that reduced the driver's workload at exactly the moment when hesitation killed. They built a vehicle that did not feel like a tank so much as a gun strapped to a runaway engine. At Aberdeen Proving Ground, the prototype proved the scandal. 40 miles per hour, 45, 50, then higher. Test drivers who expected a fragile experiment found something responsive, balanced, and almost unnerving. It could accelerate. It could turn. It could relocate before observers finished writing down where it had been. But every demonstration ended at the same objection. What happens when it gets hit? And the honest answer was devastating. It dies. The Hellcat could not pretend otherwise. A Panther shell would not bounce politely off its front. An 88mm round would not need a second invitation. Artillery airbursts could punish the open turret. Close infantry could make that missing roof feel like a death warrant. The critics were not wrong about the weakness. They were wrong about the battlefield. Bruce's answer was not that the Hellcat could take punishment. His answer was that it was never supposed to volunteer for punishment. It would not win by standing in front of the Panther's gun and asking physics for mercy. It would win by refusing the terms, by reaching the flank, by firing first, by shifting before the enemy's turret caught up, by turning seconds into survival. The stopwatch was the armor. That was why so many officers struggled to evaluate it. Armor thickness fit neatly in a table. 25 millimeters was a number anyone could hate, but the fraction of a second between firing and being targeted did not look like protection in a procurement document. It looked like optimism. And armies distrust optimism when dead men are the cost of being wrong. So the Hellcat had to prove the idea in the only language institutions respect. A comparison. The scenario was simple. A simulated breakthrough, a starting point behind the line, a race to the firing position, then a relocation test after the shot. The M10 moved first. Steady. Competent. Familiar. It got there in 12 minutes. The Hellcat ran the same problem and reached the position in 5 minutes. In ordinary life, 5 minutes is nothing. In armored warfare, 5 minutes is the distance between a column still unfolding and a column already aimed at you. Then came relocation. The older vehicle moved out from its firing point like a machine trying to obey Doctrine. The Hellcat leapt away like Doctrine had finally found an engine. By the time the observers understood what they were seeing, the argument had changed. This was not a lighter M10. This was a different answer to a different question. Not how much can it survive if hit, but how often can it make being hit impossible? Production followed. Buick built 257 M18 Hellcats before the line ended. Not enough to make them common. Enough to make them matter. Crews were trained on a truth no armored soldier likes hearing. Your armor will not save you. Your motion might. The lesson was not cowardice. It was discipline. Find the firing point. Strike from where the enemy is weak. Move before the enemy's map of the battle catches up to reality. Do not admire your shot. Do not wait to see history confirm that you were right. Fire. Move. Live. By September 1944, the Hellcat was in France, with American forces pushing toward Germany. The roads were no longer the clean test tracks of Maryland. They were wet, broken, crowded with supply trucks, retreating vehicles, infantry, mud, smoke, and fog. And near Arracourt, in Lorraine, the vehicle finally met the enemy it had been built to answer. German Panthers came through the fog, expecting American armor they understood. They found something stranger. A vehicle that would not stay in the place German gunners had just seen. The Hellcats used terrain, haze, flanks, and timing with a precision that made the German advantage in armor feel heavy instead of powerful. The Panther could kill almost anything it saw. The Hellcat's gift was to be seen too late. At Arracourt, small groups of M18s helped destroy German armored vehicles at a ratio that stunned commanders who had doubted the program. 7 Hellcats were credited in one stretch with destroying 39 Panthers over 11 days. The exact accounting varied report as battlefield accounting always does, but the pattern did not vary. German armor was burning. American light tank destroyers were still moving. The theory had passed its first real test, and that should have been the end of the argument. But war has a way of changing the exam after you have studied the right questions. Because the Hellcat was designed for movement. It was designed for open response, fast flanking, and aggressive relocation. It was designed for the 5 minutes before the breakthrough became irreversible. Then December came. The Ardennes froze. The roads narrowed. The forests closed around the battlefield, and the Germans launched their last great offensive in the West. On December 16, 1944, German forces smashed into the Ardennes through fog, snow, and terrain Allied commanders had considered unlikely for a major armored attack. Hundreds of thousands of men moved into a front that bent back under the shock. Roads vanished under ice. Units lost contact. Columns were cut off, and at the center of the crisis sat Bastogne, a Belgian road junction that mattered, because roads matter more than slogans in winter war. Control Bastogne, and movement through the southern Ardennes becomes possible. Lose it, and the German advance has to twist around its own traffic, fuel, and confusion. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion was ordered into Bastogne with M18 Hellcats. They drove through winter darkness toward a battle that violated almost everything the vehicle preferred. Restricted terrain, close-range threats, snow, ice, static defense. No room for the clean kind of speed Bruce had imagined. The Hellcat was about to be asked the worst question possible. Can a machine built to survive by moving survive when the battle forces it to stay? The answer began with misery, not glory. The open turret, useful for visibility and speed of action in some conditions, became a hole through which winter entered the crew's bones. Men handled steel that could burn skin with cold. Breech mechanisms stiffened, fluids thickened. Engines had to be kept alive because a shut-down vehicle might not wake again. The Hellcat had no roof to trap body heat. No heavy armor to make the crew feel buried but safe. No comforting illusion that mass would solve the problem. Only training. Only discipline. Only the same idea compressed into smaller spaces. If you cannot race across miles, move across yards. If the forest takes away speed, use timing. If the road locks the enemy into a column, make the first burning tank become the wall that traps the rest. Bastogne turned the Hellcat's doctrine inside out, and the crews adapted. On Christmas morning, German armor pushed toward the American perimeter. The ground was frozen hard in places and treacherous in others. The roads mattered because the fields could betray heavy tanks. A Panther that looked invincible in the open could become trapped by its own weight when forced into a narrow approach. That was the crack. Hellcat crews waited in hull-down positions, behind folds in ground, near wrecked buildings, behind the small concealments that become everything when armor cannot sive you. A Panther appeared. The M18 fired from the side. The lead tank stopped and burned, blocking the road behind it. The next vehicle hesitated. That hesitation was a gift measured in seconds. The Hellcat fired again, then shifted. 20 yards, 40 yards. Not the 60-mile-per-hour sprint from the test track, but enough. Because the German gun turned toward a position that no longer held the thing it wanted to kill. That is what the doctrine really meant when stripped of glamour. Not speed for spectacle. Speed is refusal. Speed is a way to deny the enemy a clean answer. Across the Bastogne perimeter, the 705th fought a battle the Hellcat had not been designed to fight and still made the principle work. They used barns, ridges, frozen roads, smoke, and ruined walls. They fired from places German crews did not expect a tank destroyer to fit. They moved before return fire could turn suspicion into impact. They turned the Panther's strength against it by forcing heavy vehicles into narrow problems. By the end of the fighting around Bastogne, the 705th had helped hold the perimeter under conditions that should have favored heavier armor and punished thin-skinned machines. The battalion's record became part of the Hellcat's legend, not because the vehicle's weaknesses vanished. They never vanished. because men learned how to fight inside those weaknesses without surrendering to them. That is the part easy histories get wrong. They say the Hellcat was fast, as if speed were a magic spell. It was not. A fast vehicle driven stupidly is just a wreck arriving early. The Hellcat worked because its crews were trained to treat speed as a tactical instrument. The gun mattered. The engine mattered. The torsion bars mattered. The transmission mattered. But the most important component was the habit built into the men. Do not meet strength where it is strongest. Do not let the enemy decide the range, the angle, and the rhythm. Do not confuse protection with thickness. The Germans learned too. Their crews began to understand that engaging the Hellcat at short range in cluttered terrain could be fatal because the first shot might come from the side and the second might come from somewhere else. Long range favored German optics and frontal armor. Restricted terrain could punish the American vehicle. But the problem was never simply the machine. It was the machine attached to a doctrine. And doctrines are harder to kill than vehicles because they live in decisions. By 1945, American armored commanders who had once doubted the Hellcat were asking for it. The record was difficult to ignore. Across the European theater, M18-equipped units produced one of the strongest kill ratios of any American armored vehicle in the war. The Hellcat never became a main battle tank. It never became a thick-skinned brawler. It did not need to. It had won by being exactly what its critics said it was: light, exposed, dangerously thin, and fast enough, in the right hands, to make those facts matter less than they should have. Then the war ended, and the institution began doing what institutions do after emergencies. It cleaned the table. Programs were closed. Branches were reorganized. The specialized tank destroyer concept that had produced the Hellcat was judged less necessary in the post-war army. The tank destroyer branch disappeared. The school closed. The battlefield logic that had once seemed urgent was folded back into larger combined arms doctrine. Andrew Bruce did not become a myth in his own time. He did not turn the Hellcat into a personal monument. He did not spend the rest of his life insisting the Army admit he had been right. He continued serving. He retired. He faded into the quieter rooms where many wartime innovators end up when the crisis that made them necessary has passed. That would make the story feel unfair if legacy only lived in speeches. But legacy also lives in machinery. The Hellcat's design ideas did not vanish with the branch that built it. Torsion bar suspension became a standard feature in later armored vehicles. Automatic transmission concepts became normal in American armored design. The idea that mobility, surprise, and initiative are forms of protection did not die. It migrated. Armored cavalry. Maneuver warfare. The belief that being where the enemy is not ready for you can matter as much as being strong where he is. The Hellcat did not invent every part of that future, but it proved one brutal version of it in steel. A vehicle does not have to be the heaviest thing on the battlefield to change the battlefield. It has to force the enemy to answer the wrong question. The Panther asked, "Can you survive my gun?" The Hellcat answered, "Can you turn fast enough to use it?" The procurement board asked, "Can 25 millimeters protect a crew?" Bruce answered, Only if you stop thinking of protection as a wall. De Waer asked, does speed matter when the snow closes the roads and the forest steals the horizon? The 705th answered, yes. Even 20 yards can be armor if the enemy is aiming at where you were. That is why the M18 Hellcat still feels so strange. It was not a perfect vehicle. It was not even a balanced one. It was an argument driven at 60 miles per hour. An argument that the Army's tables could not measure cleanly. An argument that said the safest place on a battlefield is not always behind the thickest steel. Sometimes it is 1 second ahead of the enemy's decision. The men who fought in the Hellcat did not survive because the machine forgave mistakes. It did not. They survived because they learned its unforgiving language. Arrive first, strike from the side, move before pride makes you stay. Let the enemy shoot at an empty place. And when the war tried to reduce survival to inches of armor, the Hellcat left behind a different measurement. 5 minutes to the firing point. 70 extra yards after the shot. 25 millimeters of steel that should not have been enough. And 60 miles per hour, proving that sometimes the difference between a coffin and a weapon is not how much punishment it can absorb. It is whether the punishment arrives after the target is already gone. The Hellcat did not survive because it was hard to kill. It survived because, in the moments that mattered, it had already left the place where death was aiming.